Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. I hope you had a great day. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories, where people conform to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you for subscribing to the channel and for hitting the like button. Today we have 4 great stories. If you enjoy them, please subscribe and hit the like button. And now let's begin, shall we? The first story is called He Thinks He Taught Me a Lesson. In the late 90s of the last century, while I was working at an international organization, things at the office deteriorated a bit. People were rotating in and out of the office, and my manager was one of them. The specimen that became my new manager was what my grandmother, with a knowing glance, would call special, entitled and superior, according to himself. Let's call him Frank. We did wholeheartedly agree on one thing though, the dislike we had for each other. One of the tasks I had assumed was head of protocol for my boss, the High Commissioner. This basically means that I had to ensure that he was treated according to his station, with all rights and privileges awarded to him as an international dignitary. Oh, and I had to look solemn. Our office was working closely together with a number of NGOs on several issues. We would make policy and they would implement it on the ground with projects, etc. One of the NGOs was organizing a conference where we would connect policymakers with international legal experts. The objective being, international experts don't bite, don't try to invent the wheel, call them. The director of said NGO visited us often, and we got along like a house on fire. Much to the annoyance of Frank, who thought I didn't know my station. So when the High Commissioner was asked whether I could assist with the organization, he agreed immediately. I had built up somewhat of a reputation in that field, so it wasn't considered strange. So far, so good. I helped arranging the hotel, drivers, interpreters, liaise with various ministries and experts. The NGO got used to calling me all hours, weekdays and weekends, to check or discuss things. I didn't mind, I worked hard. We had rented conference rooms in a 5-star hotel in Vienna. The police would supply security, the airport would receive the guests, and all people would be staying in the same hotel. The only thing was, due to agenda restraints of various participants, the conference would start on Friday and end on Monday. Everybody assumed, me included, that I would be there. There was one detail I had forgotten, to ask Frank's permission. I needed to have a form signed to authorize my travel, otherwise I wouldn't get paid for working, much less travel there. On Monday morning I walked into Frank's office and dropped the blank authorization form on his desk, with as neutral a look as possible, trying to pass it off as an annoying detail. Sir, concerning the conference, could you sign the document for approval? I know it's a bother, but you know, please? He picked it up, looked at it, and holding it, checked something on his computer. This conference isn't organized by us, but by the NGO? Correct, the boss is a guest. So the rooms and travel are paid for by the NGO? Correct. So you will be a guest. You may go. I'll grant you the Friday and Monday as paid leave, and nothing else. He filled in the authorization form, signed it, gave it to me, and gave this little wave that you use towards servants. That will be all. I stood up, kept my jaws as clenched as my fist, and walked out, fuming. Getting back to my office, I was met with one of the policy advisors who wanted to discuss the details of one of the meetings. I think I radiated an air of dejection, because he asked me what was wrong. I told him, "You can't accept that." I shrugged. "There's nothing much I can do. He is my manager." As he stood up, he said, "Well, we'll see about that." I went about my day and managed to push it to the back of my mind. A few days later, I was called into the High Commissioner's office. He was sitting behind his desk with papers piled up in great stacks. He never learned computer. He was talking with the director of the NGO, who was sitting opposite of him. They seemed very relaxed. The High Commissioner looked at me and smiled. "Ah, have a seat. I gather you will be working with us in your spare time?" I nodded. "Yeah, Frank didn't give me authorization." "Well, correct. And I will not change one iota, as he is your manager. I have to respect his decisions regarding his own staff. Otherwise, I'll undermine his authority, and I can't have that. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. The authorization stays unchanged. It's a bit of a conundrum really, as I gather you are working day and night on this." I nodded again and wondered why they called me in to state the bleeding obvious. In the silence that followed, the director let out a chuckle and my boss started smiling. He grabbed a form off his desk and looked at it. What followed next was the most astonishing monologue I have ever heard. Not because of eloquence, but because of implications. "We had ordered you a plane ticket, but we have just decided that we need you to bring some supplies. So you will be going with your own car and will be reimbursed a first-class train ticket with sleeping quarters. As the supplies you will have to bring take up some space, we have decided that your room will be upgraded to a suite. Can't have you tripping over everything now, can we?" Oh, and I understand it is quite heavy, probably too much for you to carry alone. Would your girlfriend be available that weekend to assist you carrying the supplies? We will reimburse her travel and stay, on the same conditions of course. Furthermore, you will get a per diem for 4 days, and as you will be working during the weekend and 2 days of your leave, your salary will of course be increased. Leave days and Saturday 150% and Sunday 200%. Now, where do I sign? Oh, and tell your girlfriend that I will be looking forward to host her at my table for the first evening. The director now burst out laughing. After a couple of seconds, he composed himself and added, "Oh, and as you're consulting for us as well in those days, we will pay you a consultancy fee as well, of course. Not a large one, but an administrative fee should do." Listening to this, I had to process what that meant. I would be reimbursed more than an entire month's salary for 4 days' work. But won't Frank protest? I mean, I don't want to get in trouble over this. My boss looked at me and tried to look as innocent as possible. As far as I'm aware, I've completely respected his authorization form, so I am not undermining his authority in any way. I've just added a new one to it. He continued with a smile that I can only describe as slightly evil. What we discussed here falls under confidential information. You are not aware of this conversation, and I have forgotten I have signed this document. I nodded. In the environment I worked in, you quickly learn to have no active memory of a lot of things. I stood up, walked to the door, and suddenly something hit me. What supplies do I have to transport? The director randomly picked up a slender folder, marked conference, with at most 10 pages, reached out and gave it to me. Thought you'd never ask. This. Don't drop it. I understand it's heavy. My girlfriend and I had a lovely time, and as she was from Vienna, she was positively radiating, inviting her friends for coffee or drinks at a 5-star hotel suite. Oh, and Frank? He never found out, and up to this day he thinks he taught me a lesson. The next story is called Just Following the Policy. I used to work for a company in the UK, based in London, but with regular travel all around the country. We had very long hours, and we are required to be on site when work began at 7:30 AM, but you could be hundreds of miles away. You were allowed to stay away, but you had to get approval from a senior manager. They usually only agreed through gritted teeth because of the difficult expenses policy and the wrath of the senior manager who approved the expenses. I used to get up early, commute all around the country, often doing 2 to 3 hours in the car at a time. Most often stopping to fuel the car or just have a break, usually grabbing some breakfast and a coffee, because I was often leaving the house before it was palatable to eat breakfast. I was young and conscientious, so would buy my own breakfast but buy a coffee separately and keep the receipt for expenses, usually a £5 breakfast and a £3 coffee. Our expenses policy allowed me to put a whole lot on expenses, but I was conscientious. Anyway, after months of this, I submitted my expense claim. My immediate manager approves it without batting an eyelid, as he can see the addresses on the receipts and the timestamps. So once a manager has approved it, the expenses would go to one senior manager to approve for maybe 200 to 300 claims a week. Major trust issues and seriously backwards. One morning, early at head office, the senior manager comes into my office and tells me to follow him. I follow him to his office, where he explains to me that the company isn't here to buy me coffees. Long story short, I'm told to stop playing fast and loose with the expense policy. I wasn't, and followed the rules. Here's the malicious compliance. Speaking to HR, they had a policy about work-related driving and EU Working Time Directive. This meant that all the early starts and late finishes had to stop immediately because it was breaching policy and the law. So the next time I had to be on site for 7:30 and was 2 to 3 hours away, I stayed in a hotel the night before. This included a 3-course meal and breakfast, all in line with the expense policy and working time policies. This continued for about a month, because you can only submit expenses for payment in the last week before payday. My expenses went from £100 a month to £1,000 a month. Expenses submitted, manager approved, sent to senior manager. I get a phone call to come to HR the next day for a talk with the senior manager and HR. The following day I attend, get an absolute roasting. What did I say? Who do you think you are? When I could get a word in, I explained how I was traveling in line with company policy. Health and safety legislation was also complying with the expenses policy to the letter. HR confirmed. There was nothing he could do. Needless to say, the policy was changed some months later. I felt much better because I was well rested, fed and working the hours I was being paid for. The third story is called Just Because of Parking Space. In our mid-20s, my husband and I purchased and moved into our rather modest first house with our infant daughter. I made a big effort to meet and befriend our neighbors, and all of them warned me to be careful of one particular person, Jane. Jane had lived in the street for 3 years at this point and had made a name for herself as she was manipulating, intimidating and thoroughly awful. Jane ran a daycare from her house, but neighbors on both sides reported hearing her scream at the kids and leave them unsupervised in the garden. It's important to note that Jane's partner is a police officer. The neighbors were scared of retaliations if they reported her or stood up to her. It seemed Jane would use this to get away with her horrific behavior. Our house had a driveway with a drop curb, big enough for one car, but we could fit both if you blocked in the first and only used the second car. Parking on the street was very limited, and we had double yellow lines outside our house, not allowed to stop and park there. During some essential roof work, our driveway was taken up by scaffolding and a skip, so we parked in the street and my husband parked outside Jane's house. The next day, when he went to his car, Jane came running down her path, shouting at him. She screamed about his antisocial parking, that his car would be towed, and that he could expect it to be scratched up if he left it there any longer. My husband calmly explained it was a public road and she had no right to police the space. Her screeches at this point were loud enough that I and several neighbors heard and came to see the commotion. Her partner was perched at the door during all of this, saying and doing nothing. When she saw me on pavement with our daughter, she pointed and screamed, "You'll have the social on you if you don't screw off. I'll scratch you right up." At this point, I told my husband to come back and we are calling the police. She responded, "Call the police. I dare you." She pointed at her partner. "He's a policeman. He'll sort you out. You won't know what hit you." At this point, my husband looked at her husband and said, "Is that right? And you are agreeing with what she said?" The partner nodded and said, "You need to move or accept the consequences. You'll call the police, it won't get you anywhere." Finally, when I then took out my phone and dialed the non-police emergency number on speakerphone and made a police report, both of them looked a lot less confident. Jane stood there open-mouthed, then grabbed her partner and slammed the door. We haven't heard from her since. Her partner was placed on suspension due to the allegation and further allegations from our neighbors. He then returned to an admin role. After our confrontation, Jane was given a warning for a public order offense. However, due to a number of reports, her daycare closed and she is no longer allowed to run one. Their house is up for sale. However, as she made a number of modifications without proper planning or works people, its price is significantly lower than they expected, and they are in negative equity. And all because of a parking space. The last story is called Kill Them With Kindness. Back in 2019, I started working remotely for an international architecture firm as a project and sales manager. We create architectural renders for a variety of projects. Our clients come from all over the world and I manage the North American branch of the company. Our team is small and made up of myself and other women, also with backgrounds in architecture. We are lucky to work with a team that is very inclusive and supportive, and our clients are great 99% of the time. A few months into my new position, we get a phone call from an American developer requesting a rendering package. A team member from our Euro branch answers first and within 10 seconds transfers the call to our US team, as per company policy. I answer the phone. "Hi, how can we help you?" The caller immediately sounds annoyed but mumbles, "I want a drawing done of a building I'm making." I respond in my cheerful customer service voice, "Sure thing, we can help you with that." And I begin listing the design files we will need from him to create a 3D render. He cuts me off a few seconds in. "You don't know what you are talking about." It's not uncommon to deal with annoyed clients. Most people are stressed out with tight deadlines of their own, so I try to be as patient and helpful as possible. I ask the caller, "Will you please describe your project in detail? That way we can create the best design package for you." He cuts me off yet again. "I want to speak to the manager. You have no idea what you are doing. I want to talk to the man who answered the phone." At this point, I figure out what is going on. I politely explain to him that I am the manager for American projects, and the man he briefly spoke with works with our Euro branch, but the caller is just not having it. He yells into the phone, "I want to speak to an American." Thank God for volume controls on headsets. Taking a huge breath, I plaster a smile across my face and explain again in a syrupy sweet tone. "I completely understand, sir. I am the manager for our American branch. I can help you with your project. My motto is kill them with kindness." He explodes. "The man I talked to understood my entire project. You know nothing." So begins the death spiral. I decide to agree to everything he says. "I want to speak to someone else." "Sure thing. I'll transfer you to our Euro department." "No. I want to speak to an American." "You got it. How can I help you?" "Fine. I want to speak to your boss." "Sure thing. He's in the Euro department. I'll transfer you now. I transfer the call to my boss's office and wait for the inevitable. After a few seconds, my phone rings again with a transfer request. I answer with a grin. Hi, how can I help you? There's silence on the line. Then our dear caller huffs. Fine, I'll call back tomorrow then. I cheerfully bid him farewell. Okay, sounds great. I'll speak to you then. Click. We never did hear back from him. It's a shame. I really do like helping our clients. And now it's your time to shine. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories? I hope you enjoyed today's video. And I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.